The value of a college degree is one of the best investments you can make. I was reading a study preparing for this talk today. This is the return on investment. It's estimated to be about 12.5%.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Chris Tech Chat. I am Chris Harrison, founder and CEO of Talentus Global. We're a BPO and top nearshore outsourcing provider of tech talent solutions with presence in over 20 countries and 4 delivery centers in Latin America across Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Argentina. In today's episode of the Chris Tech Chat, we have the honor of having Dr. Don Rudawsky, who is a seasoned educational leader and a nationally recognized leader in higher education, analytics, and strategy. With over 2 decades of experience driving institutional effectiveness, Don has led data-informed initiatives to improve student success, retention, and graduation outcomes. He's held senior leadership roles and is known for translating complex data into actionable insights that guide strategy and innovation. Don was recently the Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness at Nova Southeastern University. Don has recently also founded the Analytics Solutions, which is an analytics and strategic planning consulting firm helping colleges, universities, nonprofit, and businesses solve their toughest challenges. In today's episode, we'll talk about challenges facing higher education today in the U.S. from the lens of an institutional effectiveness executive. Don, welcome to Chris Tech Chat.
Great to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So obviously in today's world, the issue with challenges facing higher education has become a very hot topic, even more compounded, I think, recently with some of the new presidential administrative directions in terms of financial aid and things like that. But I think the audience will be super interested in getting a perspective from you, someone who has been in higher ed for many years, over 20 years, has seen the growth and the challenges in higher education, the pressure that higher ed has had in the marketplace. Can you give us sort of a sense of the status, the state of the union today in 2025? We're in the second half of the year. A lot of institutions in summer, right? They're getting ready for the fall semester on it. So give us a sense from your perspective, 2025, where do higher ed stand? And then we'll talk about sort of key items or key subjects that I think will be of interest to the audience as well, such as demographic, the shifting the demographics, the financial pressure, the value of the degrees, some of the political and regulatory challenges, mental health, which interesting enough, a few weeks ago, we had someone talk about mental health and how they're using AI to help individuals, not only in higher ed, but across all the spectrums. A little bit about AI. AI is a very hot topic, and how AI has immersed within higher education, colleges and university, and then last but not least, sort of the quality of education, the relevant programs and degrees for 2025 and beyond, which we know that some institutions are staying well behind in terms of their degree and the value of the programs relevant to the real world today. So once again, Don, welcome to it, and let's kick it off. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the other episodes available on all major platforms.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's funny, you mentioned AI. It's like, we can't have a Chris Tech Chat without some conversation of AI. So we'll certainly talk about how that's some of the ways that that's relevant, particularly from that institutional effectiveness, institutional researcher lens. But, all of these topics really merge together. We can't talk about the demographic shifts that are going to affect enrollment without talking about cost and the value of education. These things are all really integrated so tightly. The cost of education is, a lot of it is driven so much by the additional services that colleges have determined are necessary to help students be successful in today's world. There wasn't as much emphasis on providing those mental health services 20, 30 years ago. But today, all the research shows that it's absolutely imperative. So colleges, in order to survive, are going to have to figure out cost-effective ways of offering those types of services to, ensure their students have the ability to be successful. It's just that kind of basic stuff, like a Maslow's triangle of needs. The students need this in order to function to focus on their studies. So where we're at today is at this real potential inflection point around this perception of what the value of college is, what it should cost, what it does cost, what that cost should include. So those are some of the kind of key issues that I'm seeing right now.
Got it. And trying to dive in a little bit deeper into sort of the demographic shift and the enrollment declines. What is your take on the enrollment declines across institutions, which I think has affected not only public institutions, but certainly private, for-profit, and nonprofit? What's your take on that? What is driving that enrollment decline?
Right. Well,
and I'm sorry, and is it primarily in the graduate program versus bachelor's and associates, or is it across?
It's primarily at the undergraduate level, and actually in times of economic concern, a lot of times there is some reskilling, and sometimes some of the master's and higher level degrees actually have a bit of a bounce back, and that's something that a lot of colleges are banking on, are putting resources into that graduate level education. It can also be more financially beneficial for certain universities, particularly more so in the private area, because the publics, they're paying their graduate students to be there and contribute to their research, or at least the high research ones. In the private area, that's not necessarily the case. And then, of course, it varies by field as well. The MBA students tend to pay or have their current employers, whereas, again, if we're in research fields, so it's very different. But the demographic issue that's happening right now is really in that traditional college age undergraduate level student, that there's just a lack, a decline in the number of students that are available to go to college. So we're seeing colleges more and more are merging. They're working on new partnerships, and some are flat out going out of business. It's a bit of a trend, and it's expected to continue into the near future, at least.
So there's an imbalance between sort of the supply and demand. There's less number of the population of students that are applying for undergraduate coming out of high school has diminished, but you still have the same size or number of institutions going against the same market. That's why you're saying that some colleges and universities are merging together to try to survive. Make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That's happening. Of course, this trend started some time ago, but courting the non-traditional student certainly is a place, because there's certainly population at all different ages. Most schools have kind of they figured out their niche. Is that their focus, or is it just a subpopulation they cater to a little bit? So that's something that can be done by schools, that are facing it. And of course, these trends, although they're nationwide, they are stronger in certain areas. So it would behoove the institutional researchers at each institution to be looking at where do your students come from? Are you at a national draw university? Then the national trends are the thing. Are you at a more regional university? Then you better be looking at what those demographics are like in your region. In general, this is happening most places.
Let's shift a little bit gears into a hot topic, which is the constant raising in tuition costs. This is something that we hear and we see across a lot of institutions. There's a handful of those that have purposely built their budgets around maintaining their tuition rates in the last couple of years. I know ACE up in the Midwest is a small college that has committed from the president to continue maintaining tuition, nor raising it over the last few years in place. But how is raising tuition costs affecting enrollments and the ability for students to go and apply for college and get FAFSA and all the stuff in place? And what do you think institutions should be doing? Should they stop raising the cost of tuitions and lowering their operating expenses on it to make it more easy for students to be able to apply, enter, and pay for it? What are your thoughts on that? On tuition itself?
Yeah, it's certainly a huge topic, and I alluded to this earlier. I think that the main driver of the increased costs is the additional services that colleges and universities are needing to provide their students. Some of it is research-based, data-driven, and that we've determined that the mental health services are necessary, and we can't rely on the students and their insurance to come in and be ready, or that they're going to be able to access it. So it's a good investment. It's a necessary investment, but it does have to be paid for, and is that most of the time that's going to at least somewhat be reflected in tuition. On the other hand, there's also been a trend, particularly in the more national universities, of, in their recruiting, we've got to have the prettiest, most up-to-date rec center and the lazy river and, these kinds of services that aren't necessarily directly related to student success. However, they're affecting some students' choices to attend. So is that something we need to do? And again, it's going to vary from school to school. What is your target market? And are you courting a target market that demands that? Or are you courting a target market that demands the best education at the lowest possible price? Then you don't do those things. But it really behooves the schools to really take a hard look at that and how are they financing these things, and are there ways to diversify their revenue and not rely so much on
tuition,
which is
endowment,
it's a difficult time,
right?
The endowment, if in public institutions, there's a lot of uncertainty about how that's going to, it varies from state to state and what's going to be available in the future. There's a lot of big questions there. So what are some other ways to increase revenue? Some institutions are turning towards business and looking at things like, business incubators, tech transfer in their research areas, but there are also huge cost centers doing research that can get turned into something tangible. Costs, incredible amounts of money, and the sources of that money are so the schools that are going to do well, obviously are going to be ones that have already built up that endowment, so they have the money for the investment. But then there will be some innovation that happens. There always is. Some schools are going to come up with some creative ways around that, and if you can maintain tuition as best you can, that's going to look good. And it's also important to know that to some extent, it's a bit of a game. Very few people pay the stated tuition. You got to look at the net cost, and every family, every student that is looking into attending college needs to look at the true costs and do, it behooves them to do some real strong research on what it's really going to cost over the course of the time, to be successful.
Total cost of education end to end. That's a great point. So it sounds like the education itself is evolving. The student itself is evolving over time. A student from the 80s and 90s versus a student from 2025 has changed dramatically. A student today requires different set of services, more emphasis on mental health. And these services it's something that an institution needs to be able to provide to a student in order to effectively run through or take them through their educational cycle on it, which obviously adds to the bottom line and cost, which naturally would tend to drive tuition costs to a higher rate as compared before. But I think you're right. I think there's going to be it's a fine balance, right, between providing the adequate services in place and rising tuition and trying to maintain that balance where it becomes appealing for the students and the families to be able to select and choose a specific institution based on their research of sort of the total college of education, right?
Right. And I would always, when I advise friends or family members who are looking into schools, look at some schools you didn't plan to look at, or just to get a feel. We tend to gravitate to what we know. So
right.
If you are someone in my age range, where a lot of my friends have high school graduating students coming up, they're in this phase right now, and they're doing it, and maybe they went to a 4-year public school for a bachelor's degree and had that on-campus experience, and they want that for their kid. Even though that's what they maybe want to start looking at, maybe that's what the kid thinks they want right now, look at the community college down the road and just see what that feels like, what that would mean. Does it maybe make sense to do 2 years first before getting that experience?
Great point.
On the other hand, if you go and check out that 2-year school and say, you know what, it's what I expected, it's not what I want, okay, but now you're going in fully informed that you've looked at a range. There's certainly a lot of other options. You're looking at private, nonprofit, private for-profit, looking at some places that are more heavily online versus every school now has a range and offers so much online versus face-to-face and hybrid models. You got to think about those. Perception of this kind of goes back to our demographics a little bit. Perceptions of today's student have evolved, and they like online education. There's some studies that show that they perceive it to be equal to, or in some cases better. And of course, that also really varies from institution to institution and what kind of infrastructure they have in place to support their online. Are they just doing the same thing they do in the classroom, just using an online tool, or are they truly using the pedagogical features of an online classroom to their full advantage?
Yeah, that's a great point that you mentioned a few minutes ago about parents looking at the big picture itself. I know a couple of friends of mine that their kids ended up going to a 2-year community college and did the first year there. And because that community college had an agreement with a 4-year public institution, they could transfer all those credits from the first 2 years and went straight in the university. They paid lower tuition for the first 2 years, and then they graduate from a great public institution in place. Being smart, looking around what's out there, the dynamics, what really the student's looking for, what's in the best benefit for them. I mean, that having an informed set of parents, and you're absolutely right, the dynamics have changed. An institution that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe more, you and I went to college was great. Today might not necessarily be a great institution. You know, they might have lost some accreditation, right? So I think the dynamics are constantly changing, that you need to have an educated set of parents looking at all the options and outside the box. Look at small colleges that maybe were not known 20 years ago, but today they're rising star. They're on the uphill. They're doing really good, great accreditation, great programs, good quality, good tuition, good value for the tuition.
Yeah, all accredited schools have something about them that is worthwhile. They've gone through the process. They've all got some level of great faculty. But is it the specialty that your student or that you want to study in that's particularly strong? Is it something about the campus experience that you want? I mean, that's another, back to that topic of the cost. Well, the cost is borne out by all the services. Maybe you or your child doesn't need all the services, or prioritize which services are most important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Switching gears a little bit into a more controversial topic, which is the value of degrees. We've all been hearing these tech giants from Zuckerberg saying, or Elon Musk saying, you don't need a college degree, just go and get a course on data science, on Python, we'll hire you, you'll start making some six figures. A lot of controversy around that. What are your thoughts on the value of degrees and education, and how important that continues to be, in my mind, continues to be the pillar for America and the development countries?
Yeah. Well, I am a higher education professional. Of course, I believe, but it's not about belief. It is the fact. The data bear it out. The value of a college degree is one of the best investments you can make. I was reading a study preparing for this talk today. This is the return on investment. It's estimated to be about 12.5%. That's better than an 8% return on stock market or a 4% return on bonds. So, you're betting on yourself. You're investing in yourself. It's not even a bet. Now, I think some of the problem is that we all have heard stories. Maybe we know directly, or maybe we've only heard stories, of the student that comes out of school with a large debt and can't get an adequate job right away. And it does take some time, particularly in the current hiring,
market.
Our current economy. There's a lot of businesses that are holding off on some of the hiring, just waiting to see how things shake out. And yeah, it's tough, but the data really show, no matter what, it is a worthwhile investment for the majority of people.
Don, and that 12.5% return is on an undergrad degree?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just on the bachelor's.
On the undergrad.
And they certainly go up with more, but you're looking at, a median weekly earning of under $1,000 for someone who earns a high school diploma, and a median earning of $1,500 for a bachelor's degree. And then it goes up from there. That's right out the gate. Now, then they talk about the opportunity cost. Okay, yes, it traditionally takes 4 years to earn a bachelor's degree. So that's 4 years where you're not earning anything typically. Some do, and some earn, at least do some part-time work and juggle. But yeah, it's not certainly for everyone to be able to do that. But it really it tips over quite quickly. And even though there's a lot of concern about what's happening, as far as hiring students, and maybe this will lead us into our AI discussion to some extent, it's still the lifetime earnings, it goes up exponentially. And then there's other types of ROI that are realized by college graduates. They have a longer life expectancy, better health outcomes, and they tend to have better health care, which leads to both of those things, of course. More opportunity for advancement. When you're in a professional job, the most professional jobs tend to be held by people who have earned a college degree of some sort. There's more opportunity for advancement throughout the career. So the data show it's good early in that 25 to 35 year range, but it's also, then it expounds as they go on. You mentioned people like Zuckerberg who are saying a few things contrary, and there's some truth to some of the things that they say. Some people can do very well with those kinds of things, but I think that they're getting an outsized proportion of people follow what they say. Who is the higher education spokesperson? Who is, people don't, really focus on university presidents and what they're saying about the value of education. I hope some of our listeners think that what Don Rudawsky had to say is worthwhile, and that, I've got some research behind it. But the popular press and, people are not going to know that. I think that we need to find some spokespeople that start talking about this. And I'm not sure where we find that, because our popular folks, if we go into the world of entertainment or sports, a lot of them didn't, have to go through the college route, or those, maybe in sports who did, wasn't their focus when they were in school. But there are many who are. And then the ones that are successful after athletics in particular, I would love it if some of them would speak up about the value of their education on top of the value of their sporting career.
Yeah, oh, that's a great point. And I think those individuals that build a unicorn, those are the exceptions to the rule. Those are the 0.001% of the populations. When you have that level of statistics on it, it really speaks to the exception, not really the rule. And it deals with people that have exceptional conditions in place for them to be able to thrive without a college degree. But the great majority and the reality, and like you mentioned, the data, those are facts that are proven that anybody with a college degree will advance their careers, will enhance their life, will have a better quality of life, will advance, will move, will evolve, and will have a great life. But a college degree continues to be the foundation, right?
Yes. And this perception gap is really concerning. As recently as 10 years ago, about 60% of people polled out, this is a Gallup poll, about 60% had a great deal or quite a lot of faith that, in a college degree. It's their confidence in higher education. 60% were on that plus side of the scale. 30% said some, and only 10% said very little. They had very little confidence. Only 10%. That sounds, okay. Yeah, there's going to be some skeptics anywhere.
There's always going to be those, right?
That seems reasonable. That's 10 years ago. 2024 data, it's neck and neck percent. So just a little over a third have that great deal of confidence. So we've gone from 60
to 30
to 36, and then the low, the 10%
went up
that
to 30
said no, very little. It's up to 32. It's almost a third now, and that's where we have a hard time changing perceptions.
Yes.
We have a hard time encouraging public investment when the confidence is that low. Education used to be considered a public good. That's why the GI Bill happens.
Yes.
These kind of wonderful things that led to a great economic boom for the United States. People need to remember history a little bit on this.
Yes.
When we invest in education, it's good for everyone.
It's good for everyone. Yeah. And I think part of this might have been, and this is my personal observation, the internet has had an impact. Digital media has had an impact. Social media has had a huge impact on it. And I think, unfortunately, some of the younger generations are looking, how much money can I make quickly on being a promoter or being an influencer versus going to college and studying and understanding and getting solid foundation. And unfortunately, they're getting guided into the wrong direction. I'm fearful for that. I see that I see a lot of younger individuals making a lot of money in social media and really not paying attention to what's important, which is getting a strong, solid foundation on your studies on it, which is much more important. It's not only about understanding about the world and understanding about the basic of history and math and social science and all those, but it's about developing also those social skills as well, how to communicate well, how to be a good person, individual, how to collaborate, to work well as a team. All those things are left on the side. And I'm afraid that we're going to the wrong direction because of all those pressures. You got these influencers making 7 figures, 6 figures on it. And their parents can say, I need you to go to college. And they're saying, why, Dad and Mom, I'm going to college? I'm making so much money doing this thing on the side.
Yeah. And we have to watch, again, with this perception and spokesperson issue that I've brought up regarding the value. How sustainable is that?
Yeah.
What percentage of people, young people who want to become influencers are that successful? See it because you're looking for it. And the influencer life looks alluring. I'd love to get paid to go sit on the beach and take nice pictures. But nobody wants to see me do that. But I could see why it's so alluring. And why can't you do both? Why can't you get the college degree so that that's a sustainable model afterwards? That
long-term.
Mentor the next, because young people, that's part of, it's a lifestyle that is being marketed to young people by young people. So let's not try to fight it too much. They're not going to listen to you and me necessarily. So let's figure out other ways to influence.
But I think you're onto something that we haven't really, at least I haven't really thought about it before until you mentioned it, which is there isn't anybody or a group of people that have that flag that are those spokesperson on behalf of institutions. You've got these big icons on the social media, big unicorn companies in place, and the big leaders out there in the tech world, but nobody really carrying that torch at the higher ed level. I think certainly athletes, we know some athletes that have understood the value of education. You got people like Shaquille O'Neal, got a PhD and doctorate from Barry University, honorary. People like that we need in the community across the country, in major cities and minor cities, to carry that torch and really instill that importance and the value and motivate the younger generation to see, hey, yeah, you can do both, but don't forget that educational degree at an institution is going to help you carry that long-term growth and financial stability that you need. What you're doing now on the social media, there's nothing wrong, but you got to look at the big picture long-term. And I think you're onto something on it that's got to go beyond the presidents of an institution that a lot of people maybe don't even pay attention to listen to them. But we need public figures that understand that have gone through that route and carry that torch across. Otherwise, it's becoming tougher and tougher.
Yeah, it's really, there's no unified message.
Yes.
So a lot of times if it's a university president, they're talking about the outcomes for their students because they're trying to attract students. If we're talking about this third of the country has very little faith in higher education right now, that's a broader message, a broader group to market to. And I don't know who the group is. Like, we can speculate on who good spokespersons might be, but who's going to put it together? I'm not sure. These are just some kind of recent thoughts I've been having in this area, and I'll be talking to my colleagues as much as I can to see.
No, but it's a great point. I think you're onto something. That's something that we have not had. We haven't. Period. And now, even more than ever, we need it. This statistic that you just shared with the audience continue to rise for those individuals that don't truly believe in the value. How they've gone up from 10% 10 years ago to 35+% in 2024, 2025. Those are scary figures on it. Can we talk a little bit about AI and the disruption in higher ed and your thoughts on how much AI should be included in higher ed, whether it's on the operational side, on the academia side, or your thoughts on that?
Sure. So artificial intelligence, it's such a huge topic. It's such a nuanced thing, because we could talk about it in terms of, when I first became aware of it from an institutional research perspective, the concern was students using it to cheat. Okay. And that was a huge concern, and it still is. However, it's here. it's like we eventually let students use calculators
Right.
to help in math classes so they could get to more advanced mathematical concepts that need, the deeper statistical modeling and things of that nature. So it's going to take educational leaders to really think through how to train students to more effectively use AI and how to evaluate the results from using any particular AI. And then we have to be looking at the effects of the use of AI on individuals. Fascinating new paper, draft paper from some researchers at MIT, I just became aware of this morning in one of my newsletters that comes through. Very clearly, it's a very small study, but it's showing that students that used a particular AI for essay writing showed weaker brain activity and retention compared to those who had to do the same assignment
From the ground
unaided,
up.
or they were allowed to use, they had a group that had to just figure it out, and they had a group that was allowed to use internet search, but they had to read the resources themselves and write their essays, and then they tested their brain activity. Now, it's the first study I'm aware of. It's a small study. It isn't published yet, but it's making the rounds. It's exciting, and it's interesting, and there's going to have to be continued research in that area.
So it sounds like that study is highlighting the lack of critical thinking by maybe leveraging AI, right?
Right. So then if this becomes a more validated finding, then it behooves higher education to get this message to the students, and it needs to focus on, okay, you're going to use it. I used it, you used it for this.
The question is when and how, right?
Yes, and evaluating the results, and you have to be critical about those results, and how can we get a newcomer, so a student, to become a critical consumer of these things. I'll leave that to some extent to my faculty colleagues. That's really their area of expertise. But I'm a social psychologist by training, so it's also a little bit my wheelhouse. So we'll talk about that. Now that's the kind of on the student side of things, but then AI has so much potential for aiding universities and institutional effectiveness staff in providing better insights, quicker insights into the levers that can be pulled to increase student success, whether that's retention, graduation, educational, if you have any kind of educational attainment type measures at your institution, the enrollment, or yes, it can also be leveraged for in the fundraising areas. There's so much and
potential.
What I've found is I've left a permanent position at one institution to now working with multiple institutions and working in some businesses. Businesses are industry in general is way ahead of higher education in their use
and adoption of AI, big time.
Yes, and so we need to learn more from industry. As a matter of fact, that's going to bleed into another topic that we wanted to talk a little bit about, the relevance of programs and degrees. A lot of schools talk about how they are integrated with the business community. Are you really integrated with the business community? Are you really learning from them, or are you making them feel good about what you're doing and maybe getting some donations and having people on a board, but is that board engaged and actually giving you insights that you can use? Academics tend to think we know what's best, and a lot of times we do, but we could be missing out.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we're, again, at a pretty critical juncture where we need to listen to those insights. So both AI, I think we need to leverage our business relationships to have them help us better understand our own data. They have some expertise. I mean, yes, a lot of my colleagues were developing it or have developed it, but let's get our data systems set up much better to leverage AI to give us those insights on how to help individual students. I mean, I think that's one of the key things. We have clear research on what leads to student success, but can we tailor it? Can we get even more personal with it? And I do think that that's where AI could step in a little bit more.
So personalized education driven by AI, aided by AI, could be a huge value proposition for students in place in there. But it sounds like also you just touched on a point in there that there's a disconnect between the programs that institutions are offering today and the feedback, what's happening in the real world, or the needs of the real world. That continues to be a misalignment. And maybe not every institution is 100% tuned to what really are the needs out in the marketplace. And some of the institutions are maybe still running programs that are 20, 30 years old that are maybe irrelevant in the real marketplace. And they're graduating these students that cannot get a job, right?
I mean, that is happening to some extent. Again, it's also a little blown out of proportion that students can't get jobs. They do. It may not go as quickly. It may not be as high paying at first as one would like, but the data still show very clearly works for the majority of people, regardless of institution. That said, yeah, the use, some of the data that I'm seeing in this area is one, yes, there's always learning about new trends, new majors, things that should be a program, but retooling existing majors just to make sure that they're current, that they're, are you integrating AI in your program in a way that the professionals that have that degree are doing now. And I know I've taught. As a matter of fact, I thought I was going to be a faculty member when I finished my PhD. I loved students. I loved the research that I was doing, and sort of ended up doing this institutional research, which is, very similar to what I had been doing. But teaching, it's a huge job. The demands that we are putting on faculty to teach any course. You've got to develop your syllabus, you've got to develop your teaching materials, you've got to grade the materials, you make the assignments, you got to do the grading. That's a big job in and of itself. You can get some assistance. A lot of schools have a lot of good resources for faculty to help with parts of that.
Right.
They're advising students, and that's a key student success thing. When a faculty member is serving in a mentorship role, it's huge for student success. But how much time do they have? Are they in a research-based institution, or even ones that are maybe less so? Certain faculty are going to want to have some time for research. So what's their pressure and time there? Service. We expect faculty members to provide service to the university, serving on committees, doing these things. How do we balance all that? What's the right workload? And how do we stop from burning out the faculty? And how do we give them time to make those connections with industry? It's got to be so tempting once you've got that syllabus, and you've done it, to keep it similar.
Right.
How often do you truly revamp? The best faculty, absolutely, they're doing it. Maybe not every semester, maybe not every year, but every couple of years they're at least, having a fresh look. Are they being given the time and the tools and the resources to do those kinds of things? I think it varies very much from institution to institution.
Faculty workload, yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a two-way street. It's not just institutions having sort of the ability to do that, but having the faculty, the bandwidth to be able to accommodate for that, because of all the overload that they have on a daily basis on it, from, like you said, teaching classes, evaluating students, research that they have to do on the side as well. All that workload on their behalf I think is important. Don, I think we can go for hours and hours on it. I think this has been a great episode. I think our audience will certainly appreciate your perspective, your experience on it, your value on it. And again, this has been super helpful. And I think we would love to have you come forward in the future and share with us another set of perspectives on it. But it's been great. And we want to thank you for being on our podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'd like to end by asking the viewers or listeners, if you have an idea on who should pick up this torch of telling the world the return on investment, improving the perceptions of higher education, who should be spokespeople, or who should sort of take the lead in finding some spokespeople, I think that'd be a great thing to put in the comments or email us. Let us know. I'd love to hear from others.
I actually never heard anyone in higher ed mention that, about sort of carrying the torch and leading the efforts on behalf of higher ed. That's a pretty powerful opportunity, I think, for somebody or a group or a consortium, whatever it is in place, like you mentioned it, to start driving that. And I think it's time for someone to step into that role, or an organization, and help us continue carry that torch on higher education, which I have been a believer from day one. Higher education changed my life, undergrad and grad, and I continue to be a big supporter of this. I've been part of higher institutions. I've got not as much experience as you, almost 20 years in higher ed, but I continue to be a supporter and believer in higher ed, and the education being a strong pillar and foundation for human development, period.
Yes, indeed.
Don, thanks
again.
All
right, great talk.
Thank you. And guys, please don't forget to follow us on YouTube at Talentus Global. Thanks again.